Welcome. On this short little video, I want to show you how to use a tool that I find particularly powerful. And when it comes to teaching with technology, there's a range of tools. And the way I like to explain it, you've got a set of tools that particularly are encouraging teachers and educators and instructors to teach in what I refer to as the digital era. It's using technology, but it's not using the tool in the most effective way. Because the era that we currently sit in is what I call the fourth EdTech era. It's the connected era. And so while many digital era tools, say for example, PowerPoint, can be used in a connected way when we apply the right pedagogies, some tools are just naturally enabling connected era type of teaching. And that's what I want to have a look at in this short video. I want to have a look at how we can use a great tool called Mentimeter and use the ACT pedagogies to really activate our teaching and show you how you can be an active, connected teacher by using Mentimeter. Here we have Mentimeter. And it really is a simple tool to use. It's basically like PowerPoint, but if you have to think about PowerPoint in the connected era, well, this would be it. So firstly, I just want to give you in the first part of this presentation, a very short intro to Mentimeter, how you use it. And then more importantly, I want to show you how you activate your teaching using Mentimeter by applying the ACT pedagogies in this teaching. So it's quite simple. All you need to do is much like you would in PowerPoint, you open up a new presentation. Once you're inside, it's really straightforward. Essentially, all you've got to do is two major options. You can either add a slide or you can actually import PowerPoint slides that you've already created. The importing, it works, is not quite as effective because it essentially brings in those PowerPoint slides as images. So if they had any bullets or any fancy transitions happening, that's not going to work. So ideally, while you can do that as a quick sort of fix to try and add a little bit of connectivity and a little bit of activity to your old PowerPoint, there are other ways of doing that. I would rather suggest if you're using Mentimeter, start from scratch and you simply start with adding a new slide. All right, so we already have a slide that is available for us. On the right-hand side, you'll see your options. So you can have a typical content slide, which would be a heading such as this, or a paragraph slide, or a bullet slide. So if you wanted to have your standard style type PowerPoint slide, you could just choose bullets and quite simple, you just put in a heading. So as you can see, very simple, basically quite straightforward. If you want to drop images in here, you can do that. You can add an image and it'll appear here on the screen as well. So there's nothing too exciting about that. But what I want to show you is where it really gets exciting is when we start to look at some of the interactivity that is available. So let's add another slide. So in addition to your standard, what we would find in PowerPoint, images and quotes, etc., these top elements are what make this particularly exciting. And they allow you to add all sorts of things. So you could embed, for example, a question and answer inside of your presentation. And simply by choosing that, you would then put in what is the prompt. And then you can configure that question and answer. So for example, this could be a question that's going to appear on all slides. So at any stage, people could respond to this, or only on specific slides. Other options, can the audience see each other's questions, etc., and even further options to approve or moderate the questions. So pretty simple. There are also sort of customization features for every slide. At the moment, you will see that there is an instructions bar right at the very top, which gives a code. And that code is the code that will be used for students and for those who are following along with your Mentimeter presentation. So if you select this, that's going to remove it. But obviously, ideally, for your first few screens, you should keep that on. The other option is to hide the results. And that's quite useful because if you hide the results, as people are putting in their questions or responding to this particular thing, it's not going to appear on the screen immediately. So while that's good is that rather people get to think about what they want to say, they haven't seen what other people have just said, and when you are ready during the presentation, you can reveal the results. So that very quickly is a question and answer type slide. So there are many others, word clouds, open-ended, etc. So that basically is as simple as it is. So using Mentimeter is really quite straightforward. And when you're ready, how does it work? You basically hit present rather. And what's going to happen is now there is going to be a code The students are going to go along, grab their devices, go to menti.com, put in the pin, and they're going to follow along. And what's really great about this is now your students are, which are often being distracted because they are using their devices for sorts of other things, are using the devices to interact with you. Okay, so at the moment, obviously, there's no questions from the audience, but that is exactly how, if there were, they would start to appear here. So that's a very brief intro just to an overview of Mentimeter. But what I want to show you is where the real power comes in, and very quickly show you how you can apply the ACT pedagogies within Mentimeter and make this truly a great tool for active connected teaching. In this part of the presentation, I want to show you now how we can take Mentimeter and take this very, very powerful tool and take your teaching and make it active and connected. Now, this works really well whether you are in front of an audience, so you're actually in a classroom and you want to engage with your students in the classroom, or even if you are online. So if you're doing a Zoom session, what a great way to pull that often disconnected audience into your training and into engaging with you as the trainer. So it really is a very, very effective way, and I've used it extensively. And rather than just sit there either just talking through Zoom or sharing PowerPoint slides and your students really being very passive, you can actually engage them very effectively using Mentimeter. And all of a sudden, you as a presenter also don't feel alone and disconnected, which sometimes can be the feeling, especially if you're using Zoom in a webinar mode or any sort of tool like that where you can't actually see your students. So very quickly, how would you do that? Well, one of the great things that Mentimeter allows you to do is to make use of word clouds. So here's a great little warm-up, and I love to use this at the start of a session. Where are you from? And basically all this is going to do is it's going to ask them to type in, and over here, each participant can only put in one entry, and it allows them to put in one entry. And when they type that in, you'll get a word cloud of everyone's answers. Great little way, icebreaker, and all of a sudden, right at the start, people are starting to feel like they're involved. But what I want to show you is how you can actually take each of the ACT pedagogies, and the ACT pedagogies are curation, conversation, correction, creation, and case, and apply every one of these inside Mentimeter. Now, while this is not the be-all in for every single pedagogy, and there are tools that can do some of these things far better, this is a great space to very quickly start to apply these pedagogies and activate and connect in your teaching. So I'll give you a quick example. The pedagogy of curation is about getting people to pull content together, because we're often too quick just to hand across the content, and that doesn't encourage thinking. We want to move away from, I've got all the slides, here's all the content, here's the list, and encourage our students to think. And curating is exactly that. It's pulling content together into a space, and that organizing and that selecting and that arranging encourages our students to think. So for example, there are a whole lot of 21st century skills that are developed by pedagogies like curation and conversation. In fact, all of the pedagogies develop a range of very important 21st century skills. So I could say, well, here are a list. Some great skills are creativity and critical thinking and risk-taking, etc. And that's the order, and that's how important they are. Or alternatively, what I could do is I could get you to think about it. And so what I've done is I've used a organization type. I've used ranking here. So by putting in a ranking slide, and on my ranking slide, I have asked a question, arrange these 21st century skills, and I've listed them. And now what's going to happen are the students are going to have an opportunity to arrange these in the order that they see as important. That's curating. Because all of a sudden, rather than me just giving you the list, the student now has to think, well, do I think creativity is more important than problem solving, or what about risk taking? And in fact, the longer the list, the harder it is. But that's exactly what we want, because they're having to think. And that's a great example, or a very quick example, of getting students to engage with your content by engaging in the pedagogy of curation. The next of the ACT pedagogies is the pedagogy of conversation. And this is something that we might think, well, it's really difficult to do, especially when you're in a big class. And I've lectured in classes, in fact, to teachers and instructors and educators with over 1,000 people there. And you think, well, how can you have a conversation with so many people in a big forum like that? or maybe you're online and you're using a webinar, or your students aren't connected, or they're not turned on with cameras and audio, etc. And it's difficult to have a conversation. No, it isn't. You can use this tool to have a conversation. You can bring conversation in to your online live teaching. And very simple. All we now need to do is add a slide where we're going to put in conversation. So there are a whole lot of options in which you can do this, but really basically the simplest is to add a open-ended question. So choose an open-ended question, and we're going to put a question to the students. So it might be something around what you're talking about. Okay, so there I've got a question. How much experience do you have teaching online? That's interesting, just general open experience, whatever they say. Now what you can do is you can choose how you want to see the answers. Should they pop up as speech bubbles, or do you want them to, so you can scroll through them, or do you want a flowing grid of answers? So again, what's going to happen is you can also, and I would suggest this, is hide the results until you are ready to display the content. So again, what's going to happen, this will appear when you reach the slide. The students will now be able to put in their answer, and when you're ready, you will now be able to show all of those answers as they appear on the screen and talk about it. And so in essence, what you're doing is you're having a conversation, be it online and in a way remotely, but you're getting engaged in quite a big conversation. And you can keep the conversation going. You can ask a second question and get them to reply again. And so very powerful way of engaging your students in conversation. The third of the ACT pedagogies is the pedagogy of correction. And this is so exciting. There's some amazing tools that we can use that enable us to apply correction in our teaching. Great one, if you've never come across it, is Kahoot. But what's really nice here is that we are actually embedding the correction into our slides, essentially. And so again, I can talk to you about correction and how important it is to learn through correction and encourage students to make mistakes, because that's where learning happens. But let me encourage it, let me show them. So what you do is you can now add questions. And these are not just simple questions now, these are now quiz questions. So this is different to the open-ended or the Q&A. You'll see there is a quiz competition. Now, the difference here is that when you add a quiz question, there is a right answer, which is obviously different to when you're asking an open-ended question or there's just a basic Q&A. And so you'll see now that we have options. The fourth EdTech revolution ushered in the digital era, the connected era, or the print era. The correct answer, yes, the fourth EdTech era was the connected era. You can then give a time limit so that it increases the pressure. And this is part of what's called gamification. It gets the pressure to build up as people need to try and quickly get their answers in. And what you can then do is select fast answers, get more points. That really makes it exciting. So you explain to the students, right, you've got to get your answer in. You've got to get it correct. Obviously, if it's incorrect, you get 0 points. But the faster you get it in, the more points you're going to get. And I've seen this, doesn't matter whether they are children, whether they are K-12, whether they are students at university or adult learners, everyone gets super excited. And you can even add music. And then what will happen is after the question has appeared and everyone's gotten the answers, there will be a leaderboard. And the leaderboard will show the results, who's on the top, etc. And you can keep this leaderboard going throughout the presentation. And so what I suggest is when you do this is you take correction as a pedagogy and apply it right through the presentation, all the way to the end. And sometimes ask them questions about stuff they haven't even heard, because it encourages thinking. Because that's what correction is about. Mistakes are good. And so slowly but surely, you start to build this energy, this activity. And so very excitingly, people get really pumped, and you'll find that your levels of activity are absolutely huge. The next of our ACT pedagogies is the pedagogy of creation. Now, again, this is not the ultimate spot. There are some really great tools that we can use for encouraging creation and using in terms of really activating our teaching. But in terms of one space, Mentimeter does give us some opportunities that we can add. So one of the ways that I try and get a little bit of creation going is essentially just asking, again, coming back here, an open-ended question. And creation is about trying to move the thinking to your student, trying to get them to think about something, trying to get them to write something down. because it's so much easier for me to say things to you. It's so much harder if you've got to start yourself to articulate it. And that's part of what creation is. It's just much bigger than that. But in terms of Mentimeter, that's how we can do it. So the last of the ACT pedagogies, and again, Mentimeter is not super powerful in this regard, but there are aspects of it that it can help with, is the pedagogy of chaos. Chaos is all around two aspects. It's all around pressure and perception. And so pressure comes from many sources, like creating multiple options, time pressure, etc. But the idea of creating pressure is to try and create a perception, forcing people to distill thinking. And one of the ways in which we can do that is trying to get clarity on things is, again, this coming back to a word cloud and getting people to put in something. So it's getting them to answer a specific thing, and maybe it has to be brought down to one word. What one word best describes education today? So you'll see over here, I've given the option that they can give 3 individual one words, because we're looking for words, because a word cloud makes the words that are occurring bigger. So each of those can now be entered. And so we encourage them to think about that. And then what will end up happening is we'll end up with a word cloud that we can then talk about, that's been generated by all of these people who have participated. So that is just an example of some of the ways in which we can use Mentimeter in an active and connected teaching approach. So it is a very, very powerful tool, and why I really like it is it enables us to engage our students and not only engage them in face-to-face environments where we might be in the same classroom as them, but engage them specifically online. And I think that's where it particularly comes in and becomes really powerful. So that is Mentimeter, very simple, and how we can potentially use it in our classroom and in online teaching and encourage students to become active and connected teachers.